Well, hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Intentional Leader Podcast. I hope you're doing well. I'm Cal, and I am on a mission to try to learn to live and lead more intentionally, because we know that when the leader gets better, lives get better. And I have a treat for you today. I have Dr. Amy Edmondson on the podcast. She's a professor of leadership and management at the Harvard Business School, and she pioneered the concept of psychological safety. And she's out with a new book. It's called The Right Kind of Wrong, The Science of Failing Well. It was already named the best business book of 2023 by Financial Times. And it is a masterclass on how to fail well, which is something we all do. I really think you're going to enjoy today's conversation. If you do, would you mind leaving us a rating or review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or subscribe to our channel on YouTube? Let us know what you think. That really helps us reach more leaders and grow this community. Without any further ado, please enjoy my conversation with Dr. Edmondson. All right. Well, it is a true honor to have Dr. Edmondson on the Intentional Leader Podcast today. Good morning and welcome.
Thanks so much for having me. And please call me Amy.
Well, thanks, Amy. And I am a huge fan of your work, and it's amazing to speak with someone who pioneered the idea of psychological safety. Someone like me who likes to nerd out on leadership and think about how teams work well and why certain teams work better than others. It's just incredible to speak with you. And as I was saying before I hit record, I have pages of notes. I'm sure we will only get to a fraction of those, which is totally fine. I wanted to start, though, with the idea of psychological safety, because it seems that your most recent work builds on that a little bit. And some people may have heard that term, but may not be familiar with the concept. And I was curious if you could kind of take us to imagine, you have a lot of leaders listening. Imagine they walk into an organization or a team that has psychological safety. I wonder if you could just describe for us what that would look like and what that would feel like. What would we see if we walked into a team that had that idea of psychological safety?
I think you'd see a lot of energized discussion. I think you'd see conflict. I think you'd see some laughter. I think you'd see people willing to ask each other for help. I think you'd see people challenging each other's ideas and saying, hold on, walk me through that. I don't see how that would work. So it would be lively. It would be learning oriented. I think that's the bottom line. You would see people trying to work out the best way to proceed and doing it, honestly and energetically. Now, if these are people doing a known task, as opposed to sort of trying to come up with an idea or an initiative, then you'd see them, engaged in the work and asking for help when they need it, speaking up when they see something that doesn't feel quite right. So it really describes a learning environment. I mean, one of my early passions, one of the things that drove me to go to graduate school and pursue research was sort of a half-formed idea about the learning organization and this concept that we need to have learning organizations in a world that keeps changing. And yet that seems to be quite challenging on a number of levels. And one of the things that I sort of zeroed in on relatively early was that if the interpersonal climate isn't conducive to learning, then the teams can't learn. And if the teams can't learn, the organizations can't learn.
Yeah, we've probably all been on teams where there's that fear of speaking up. I know I've been on teams where I've watched how my colleagues are treated when they say something that's divergent. And it's interesting how just inside of our brains, without even being conscious of it, we say, "Ooh, I don't want to be like that person. So maybe next time when I have an idea that I think, I'm not sure if this is going to be well received, I'll just stay silent."
Just hold back, right?
Yeah.
Think how easy it is to hold back, right? It's just doesn't cost anything.
And my experience, Amy, mostly come from a military background as an infantry officer. And it's interesting to think about psychological safety in that context where you're literally training for war. You're training. I had an opportunity to lead a platoon in Iraq. And so the idea of people not being willing to speak up is certainly not going to be helpful in that context.
It's dangerous, right?
Literally dangerous.
It would be life threatening. Yeah, no, I love how you put that you've been in situations, I have two, where either consciously or subconsciously, you're taking in the data on how other people are being treated when they take a risk. And you process it and decide, nope, I either do or don't want to be in their seat.
Absolutely. And in contrast to that, what I've noticed on some of the best teams is that the leader, the person who's most senior, will actually encourage conflict. I talked to Pat Lencioni about this, just having the leader say, you know what, I actually want to hear from all of you. I want us to engage in healthy conflict around ideas because I want to hear all of your ideas.
Yeah. Or what are we missing? Right?
What are we missing? Love that question.
Here's how I see it, but help me out here. What am I missing? What are we missing? What other ideas do you have? Where could this go wrong? The wonderful Gary Klein pre-mortem, right? We're pretty enthusiastic about this plan, but hey, just for fun, let's imagine it went terribly wrong. What would have explained it? Right?
Yeah, we have a concept in the military. It's called red teaming, and we'll actually have a team of smart people that we identify. And we say, pick this idea apart. Just take this plan, take this mission plan, be the adversary for just a minute, and pick this plan apart and tell us what are we missing?
What could go wrong?
So we've talked about it a little bit, but what would you have a number of leaders listening, what would be your practical advice for them? And we've talked about probably some of those ideas, but what would be your practical advice for them if they wanted to create an environment that had psychological safety?
Really three things. And one is what you and I have already been doing here, which is call attention to uncertainty, right? Call attention to our vulnerability. If we get this wrong, it matters, whether we're taking care of patients or we're in the battlefield, right? That just be explicit. I mean, I think many leaders understandably imagine that everyone is on the same page about the nature of the work and the nature of the task. Don't assume that. Even if it's true intellectually, you've got to make it true kind of viscerally and emotionally, where it's sort of like, oh, yeah, we've never done anything quite like this before, or patients' lives are in our hands, or this is a really exciting initiative for the organization. All ideas welcome, right? So you're calling attention to the nature of the work that requires our brains fully in the game. And number two, you're explicitly inviting people's thinking, concerns, questions. You're saying, you're doing what you're doing in this podcast. You're asking me questions. I think leaders need to get very much in the habit of inquiry. Like, as we were modeling before, what are we missing? Or, what ideas do you have? What are customers saying? Just showing, really explicitly modeling that you are interested in what other people are bringing to the table. And then third, and possibly most important, although it's all important, is how do you respond? Like, how do you respond? And you were calling attention to that earlier, Cal, but how do you respond when someone has a dissenting view? How do you respond when someone brings you bad news or when someone makes a mistake? And the short answer is constructively. And I think the essence of a constructive response is, calm, appreciative, thanks for that clear line of sight, and forward-looking. Right? That it's all about not who did this, how did this go wrong, but what next? How can we help? What ideas do you have?
Yeah, I think it requires a level of self-control from the leader, especially when there's bad news brought to them, because there's that instinct of like, oh my goodness, that's not good.
Right, your face is going to give it away.
Right, yeah, you may, your body language may, even if you're internally trying to control yourself.
And when that happens, that's okay. Just apologize, right? Sort of like, okay, I'm sorry that this is disappointing, and I so appreciate you're bringing it to my attention.
Yeah. So, Amy, I was after serving as an infantry officer, I went to law school, and then now I'm an attorney in the Army, and I was a prosecutor for a little while. And I remember was prosecuting a felony case. I remember making a mistake. Actually, I don't even remember what the details of the mistake were, but it felt like this case was over. I felt like I had made a grave error, that literally this case was going to be done. And I remember going into the office of my senior prosecutor and bringing the problem to him, and he was so calm, and he just quickly was like, "Oh, no big deal, we'll fix this." And it was one of those moments that I'll never forget, because it made me feel like, okay, I'm going to be okay. But then it also made me feel so much more comfortable bringing problems to him in the future because of his just calm demeanor. And it marked me as a leader, like, wow, I want to be that type of leader moving forward and make my people feel safe when they feel like they've just ended something critical.
That may be the most important reason why good leadership matters, is that you are a role model, and consciously and unconsciously, people are learning from your example. And sometimes, even if the reaction feels really bad, and no one would want to put someone in that position, you still unconsciously adopt those mannerisms and those habits, right? So it's all the more important, like the impact of that leader on you, and now you're impacting others, including through this podcast, right? So it has a huge ripple effect.
I want to ask you so one of the things you put even in your most recent book, you're talking about how teams with psychological safety, they have better performance. And you also said that they have lower burnout. I'm curious about that. What is the connection between psychological safety and people on teams not burning out? Because I'm always looking for, I remember leading a team of prosecutors later on, and I was so concerned because they were dealing with tough subject matter, hard cases. I mean, there's just, everything is on the line when you're trying to work in these environments. And I was really concerned, like, how can I as a leader help them not burn out? And so that struck me. What is the connection between psychological safety and people not burning out?
Here, we have the data on it, and it's from healthcare delivery settings, including during COVID, when burnout was very much a real risk. My best explanation of it is that professionals, that folks in your line of work, we can endure a lot if we're in it together, right? If we have that psychological experience that we're all in it together, we have each other's back, we're working hard, yes, but we also see that what we're doing matters. That's actually a positive experience, right? So it's the relationship between between sort of effort and challenge and burnout is not simple and straightforward. It's very much mediated by how we think about, or moderated, how we think about the situation, right? If I think the situation is endless and grueling and full of sort of unfeeling colleagues or leaders, then it's exhausting, it's depressing, it's burning me out. If I think of this as I'm working with people I respect, who respect me, I'm all in, we're making a difference, then sign me up.
Yeah, and even as you were just talking there, it made me think of, sometimes I tend to go, when I'm thinking about how do I help people avoid burnout, it's like, well, just don't make them do so much work, or don't try to make the work easier. And then maybe there's some truth to that. But I guess as you were talking, it made me think, well, you can still do very hard work and work hard. And yet still, if you're part of a team where you feel safe and you feel that kind of cohesion, and I've been part of teams like that, it's energizing in a way, which is kind of counterintuitive.
I think we all are longing to be a part of something bigger than ourselves, something that matters. And it's with other people, right? That's part of the bigger, the purpose is bigger than ourselves, but also the being part of a team. It's less lonely. And that's where some of the energizing aspects come in. And then layer onto that the experience of second guessing and reading the room, and is it okay if I say something now? Yeah. That stuff is actually mentally exhausting.
It is.
So if you can take that away, and you got something to say, you're going to say it, then less burnout.
100%. Yeah, that resonates with me in my experience. And so I want to shift a little bit to your new work. And I just so appreciate it, even just from a human level, because as you talk about in the book, we are all fallible human beings. No matter how, I mean, think about you and your husband, and you have achieved so much. And yet I love how you're spending time helping all of us deal with failure, which is just part of the human condition.
Right.
And
Yeah. Well, thank you. You're kind.
I'm curious
to say
how did you transition? And obviously, I see the obvious connection between psychological safety and your most recent work, which I'll hold up for those watching on YouTube. The Right Kind of Wrong: The Science of Failing Well. Incredible book. As Angela Duckworth says at the top, it's a masterclass on navigating failure, which of course we all need. So thank you for writing this book. Thank you for, I know, the time investment and the hard work that it took to put that together. How did you transition to writing this book when you had spent so much time on psychological safety?
I suppose one way to answer that is that failure came first. Right? That in fact, when I started my very first research project as a PhD student was on medical errors and adverse drug events, in hospitals. So those are failures. Some of them are utterly preventable. A few of them you couldn't have possibly seen coming, like an unknown allergy to a medication. But they're failures. They're not what we hope. When a patient is in hospital, we hope that they're getting helped, not harmed. And because of my early interest in how do we help organizations learn, the idea of learning from mistakes and learning from failures was in there from the beginning. I stumbled into psychological safety during that project by accident. Right? I stumbled into it when I sort of discovered very real differences in reporting climate across the teams. Right? That some really were just fine. I'm not saying it was fun, but just fine speaking up about mistakes and errors and reporting, and others were just, can't do that. You get put on trial. You get made to feel like a 2-year-old. So I went, whoa, that's interesting, right? If this interpersonal climate or reporting climate really differs across teams in the same organization, that has enormous implications for learning. So answer one is failure was first. Failure and mistakes are important parts of learning in life and in organizations. But I think the second part of the answer is I wanted to reach the audience that I care so much about, the people like you that are interested in leadership and coaching and really helping organizations work as they should on a kind of on this broader topic. You could think of psychological safety as a very specific aspect of learning, and I think it's a really important aspect, but it's very specific, and it describes the climate in which learning happens. Whereas this book focuses more on the substance of the work, and some work, for instance, work in innovation, requires us to experiment in thoughtful ways, requires us to tolerate the fact that there will be failures along the way, and I call those failures intelligent failures. But other work, like in hospitals or on an assembly line or in aviation, calls for us to do our very best at applying the knowledge we already have. And that's about failure prevention when we can, and anticipation and mitigation of complex failures when we have failed to prevent them. And so I thought by really looking at the variable nature of the different kinds of work we do, the role of failure in these different contexts, and the leadership responsibilities for failing well, as the subtitle includes, was an important and more concrete, if you will, a more concrete way to address this broader issue of leadership in an uncertain world.
Yeah, I think people will really enjoy this book because of the nuance. And you talk about it in the book a little bit. There's on the one hand, there's the failure avoidance idea of just never try to live your life to never have to fail. And on the other, you see it a lot in the tech space. It's fail fast and really encouraging lots and lots of failure. And then this book, I think, does such a great job because failure in general, that word is maybe not as precise as we'd like it to be. It can mean a lot of different things in different contexts. But you do a great job of giving us some nuance and some helpful terminology around failure. One, just defining what is failure. what is it not? And then also giving us those 3 types of failures, and then helping us understand the nuance of how to approach each. And an intelligent failure is the right kind of failure in that particular
the right kind of wrong.
The right kind of wrong. That's right. The right kind of. Can we talk a little bit about our response to failure? Because that's where because I was actually one of the exercises I did. I don't know if it was healthy or not. You could tell me in preparing for this. Is I literally just was like, you know what? I'm just going to list out a lot of my failures, because I just obviously they're in my head.
Yeah, but they're percolating back there.
and I went, I have the big ones that I probably could spend a lot of time reflecting on and assigning meaning to, and maybe I should, and I'd be interested to get your take on that. And then there's the recent ones, like this week. In fact, I was working on a PowerPoint for my boss, and we were going over a bunch of updates. And she is a pretty high-ranking military leader. And there was one picture that I was supposed to put on a slide. It wasn't a big deal, but I didn't do it. I forgot to do it. And then I remember she's up there giving her presentation.
Yeah.
And I thought to myself, oh my goodness, she's going to come to that slide and the picture's not going to be in there. It's going to be this big deal. It ended up wasn't a big deal. But of course, I was so fixated on that one thing that I had forgotten to do. And I apologized afterwards. And she was like, oh, no big deal. And other failures that I could name this week. But I guess my head went to, it seems that our response when we experience failure on a micro level or on a higher significant level is a really key aspect to living in this space well. So I wonder if we could just talk a little bit. One, let's just start here. Why is it so hard for us to fail well? You talk about some of the negativity bias and the loss aversion and blame, and there's a lot of things that actually just physiologically make it hard for us to respond well. Right.
And so absolutely, I say we have a kind of emotional aversion to failure. But it's not surprising that we have that, right? I mean, it goes back to some of the things we talked about at the beginning, where you want to be that person who got it right, not the person who got it wrong, right? That there's both social pressure and personal pressure to do well, and that's understandable, and yet it's not very rational. I mean, first of all, we're always going to make mistakes, little ones like the one you just described, and many, if not most of them, are just not a big deal. It doesn't stop us sometimes from perseverating on them, because we just want to think of ourselves as a person who doesn't, make mistakes. Like we want to think of ourselves as sort of perfect, which is crazy because we're not. And the whole other, issue of perfectionism, which is really so unhealthy and, does not help us achieve our goals, even though it can seem like it might. So the antidote really is to think more rationally about failures, to sort of almost to keep putting them in perspective. So the one you described with the PowerPoint, it's like, I wish I'd put it on, but the fact that I didn't, I'm disappointed in myself. Maybe it made her talk one tiny iota less powerful, but really it's okay. And you sort of, you might think, well, maybe I'll create a checklist for myself next time I make a deck or something like that. So you want to think constructively about it, of like, how would that have been avoidable? And then what, if any, new practice might I just incorporate into my work so that I avoid it next time? And then some really are kind of out of the blue, and you have to say, okay, that's fine too, right? We're not in charge of the universe, and we have to not make the mistake of thinking that we are. But I think a lot of the sort of discipline of failing well is about thinking more clearly, more scientifically about failure, about being okay with the fact that we're fallible human beings. We just are. And also being more willing to experiment thoughtfully, right? More willing to take smart risks where we are trying something new that we haven't tried before, knowing full well that it might not work. It might work, but it might not work. And that'll be okay too, because we will have gotten useful new knowledge from it.
I want to just take a moment. So just hearing you talk through how I might process that failure is really, I think, important, because you're not, and correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like you're not suggesting that I just say, oh, okay, don't worry about it, like move on.
No.
You're suggesting almost like sit with it for a minute, review it, examine it.
Right? Just in case, right? It's like an investment, you paid for it, you might as well get your money's worth, right? It's just, it's small. Don't overblow it. Treat it as the small thing that it is. So it's like, don't just move on, because that isn't helpful, but certainly don't wallow in it. That's even more unhelpful.
And it seems like that can be maybe a tough needle to thread at times, because I know I can, and I'm sure others can, begin to think of myself as a failure there's probably a lot of layers to that, of course.
Yeah.
But how do we avoid making it our identity versus just really looking at it to constructively learn from it and moving on and maybe assigning some meaning to it that serves us versus, man, I'm a failure. I'm just sloppy. I missed that picture. That's just what I always do. If I were just more organized, I would, it's just like, it becomes your identity almost.
Well, you're overgeneralizing, right? So scientifically, you're going way beyond the data to overgeneralize, from this event to a global assessment of me. And that's actually quite related to what Angela Duckworth and Martin Seligman, her mentor, studied, that sort of, healthy attributions about the things that we do in our lives and the things that happen to us in our lives. And if we are prone to awfulizing, I make a mistake and then it's like, okay, I'm a failure. It's A, unhealthy, and B, quite inaccurate, right? You made a mistake, yes, and threatens to, ironically, actually increase the chance that you'll do it again. Because if you start having self-talk that is colored by, well, I'm a failure, I'm just someone who screws up all the time, guess what? That will become a self-fulfilling prophecy. So it's I think the practice, which I talk about in chapter 5, is essentially stop, challenge, choose. And stop simply means pause, take a breath, and challenge your thinking. It could be right? Your thinking could be perfect, but just take a good look at it. I didn't put that image in. I wish I had. No, it didn't ruin the talk. And no, it isn't evidence that I'm just an incompetent, idiot. Choose the most healthy and rational interpretation of events. So it's really that discipline of recognizing that that we assign meaning to events. They don't automatically have meaning. And we have the power to reassign meaning. Now, we don't want to do that in a kind of sloppy way that just lets us off the hook at all times.
Yeah.
There are different personality risks. I mean, the personality of, of sort of extreme narcissism is just one that simply cannot be responsible for anything. Right. So if anything bad happens, it's someone else's fault, or it's absolutely outside my control. Now, those people need our help. They're not great team members. They're certainly not great leaders. But that's kind of on the extremes. I mean, most of us are somewhere in between. We are prone to unhealthy thinking about our shortcomings, but we're not hopeless. We can overcome it and do better.
Can you talk, what you're talking about right now, is this the same as what you talk about in the book with the fast processing versus slow processing, high road versus low road, or is that
in the
different?
same chapter? It's in the same chapter, but yes, and it's related. So, and that, of course, building on the amazing work of Danny Kahneman, that we are, partly because it's efficient. I mean, if we had to process everything we do in our lives, we'd get very bogged down indeed, right? It's good that we can do a lot of things sort of quickly and with shortcuts and have habitual routines that work for us. But the fast processing, which isn't the most thoughtful, cognitive, frontal cortex processing, sometimes needs to be interrupted. Like, hold on, time out, let's take a look. And when we interrupt it, what we're trying to do is say, let's think a little bit more carefully about this situation. And if we're doing a failure after action review, that's what we do. I mean, we might just simply say, what did we set out to do? What happened? What's the difference and why? What will we do next time? Again, it doesn't have to take forever, and that's I draw that from your world. But in your own life, it's sort of the same thing. It's just slow it down enough to have higher quality processing about the events that matter, the upcoming events that matter. Instead of doing it in your sleep, don't do it in your sleep when it matters, right?
Yeah, and that the stop, challenge, choose, it's on page 194 of the book for those that have it. And it's such a helpful construct and framework. And I think that's what this book, one of the gifts of this book is there's so many just great frameworks to think about failure. You could tell that this was written by someone who has the brain to be able to take these concepts that seem a little mushy, put them in frameworks. I love frameworks.
So do I.
Then my brain, then I can go to them, and it's like, oh, okay, well now, I have this experience, I have this failure. Let me stop. Let me challenge the idea. Let me choose how I'm going to proceed. And those are the ways that we make failure into a learning opportunity and a gift. Can you talk a little bit about playing to win versus playing not to lose?
Yes, and we're right square in that domain.
I love chapter 5. Chapter 5. I don't know if you have favorite chapters, but that was one of my favorites.
I think it might be. It might be my favorite chapter. And for me, it was also, these are the material in chapter 5, which is really about self-awareness, so important for leaders, is material that's been in my head for years and years, but I hadn't really written about it before. So it was both hard and rewarding. And I think it's my favorite chapter too. All the chapters start with a story. That one starts with a pretty good story. But wait, I'm so sorry. I forgot the question. Talk about failure.
And I think this one starts with the Ray Dalio story. I was asking about playing to win versus playing not to lose.
Playing to win. Yeah, how could I forget that? So the premise is, and I got this years ago from Larry Wilson, who was a great mentor and great conceptualizer. Premise is that most of the time, most of us are playing not to lose rather than playing to win. So what does that mean? It means we're deliberately not forcing ourselves to stretch or to really go for it. And it's, in Dan Penk's book about regrets, he finds that, one of the dominant regrets when people look back on their lives is the risk they didn't take. The person they really wanted to ask out on a date, but thought, they'll just say no, so I'm not going to do it. That's playing not to lose. Playing to win would be you ask them. Now, they might say no, but it's okay. You're no worse off. Maybe a little embarrassed or feel a little bad. But the idea is, there's evidence for this, that many of us, it's safer to play not to lose, right? Because if you sort of play not to lose, you won't have to experience disappointment. You won't lose. And you also won't win big, right? You won't accomplish the things that you never thought possible, or you won't achieve the ambitions and the goals you were really hoping to achieve. So it's about staying safe, setting the targets where for sure you'll make it, rather than the stretch targets where you will be at risk of coming up short, but they're kind of energizing and exciting. So it's about, I don't give a specific playbook for how much stretch or what you should be doing, but it's more about recognizing that potential tendency within you to kind of hold back, right? To hold back and not do the things you're really longing to do.
And it seems like with the and I see a connection there between that and maybe the intelligent failures or the intelligent setbacks, because it almost seems like with the intelligent, there's some level of pre-deciding that there's a risk here, that we are experimenting, that we can almost expect that we're not going to be perfect. So I almost see a little bit of a connection there. I don't know if I'm off.
No, absolutely. No, because the whole idea of intelligent failure. So the book, it's a book about failure, but it's really a book about success, right? Because in a sense, failing well means use the best practices that are out there for preventing basic failures, for anticipating and mitigating the effects of complex failures. And so, it's not like we want failures where they were in fact preventable. We want to be really excellent at preventing those kinds of failures. And we do want, and we certainly want, a higher ratio of intelligent failures, which are the disappointments of experiments in new territory. So if we're in new territory, trying something that we really hope will work, but alas, we were wrong, we have to be okay with that. Right? It's simply data, right? It's not evidence of our shortcomings. It's not, it's just data that help us then take that next step. So a kind of playing to win life would be one where we have more intelligent failures. It's like my great friend, high school friend, Laura, who in her 40s took up ice hockey, right? I mean, there's no way you start to play ice hockey. I mean, she could skate, but figure skate, which is very different. And to skate while getting that puck around, I mean, that's hard stuff. So you can be sure that when Laura started to play ice hockey, she was experiencing a lot of failure, right? And even, falling on the ice, missing the pucks, all that stuff, right? But she was willing to do that because she was really excited that she thought this was going to be fun and was going to be like a really cool hobby for her to engage in. 20 years later, it's like she says she's a fanatic she loves it.
How fun.
Yeah. But, you would never do that if you were playing not to lose. Because if you're playing not to lose, stick to things you're good at, Book group, maybe. I love book group, right? But it's not ice hockey. Although for some it would be the other way around, wouldn't it?
Right, yeah, right. Yeah, but you and you
and take more risks, right? In fact, in the last chapter, which is called Thriving as a Fallible Human Being.
Love that chapter too.
One of the bits is take more risks, fail more often.
Yeah. It makes me think too about joy, because I almost think the people that I see that are the most joyful are playing to win. They're not. It's like there's this different level of energy and excitement. They're certainly not doing easy things, but they're and they're experiencing a level of, setbacks. But there's just an energy around their lives of just like, hey, I'm doing something new. I'm trying ice hockey at 40 plus years old. And, but, it's like, wow, I kind of want to be around that type of person.
Yeah,
they bring a level of energy.
They are, what's the word? They're energizing, but they're attractive, right? Like you want to be around them. And they're not taking, they take themselves seriously, but they're not all tied up in knots about how they look, or, they're not trying to be perfect or be seen as perfect at all times.
Well, Amy, the last question I want to ask, I know you're a parent of 2 sons, and, certainly all the parents out there, we think about how do we teach our kids to have a good relationship with failure, a good relationship with growth. How do we build that kind of mindset? I'm curious if you could just speak in our last question as we're wrapping up here to some of the parents out there. What are some thoughts as you've done this work that you would offer to parents as they try to navigate the challenges of bringing little ones into the world and helping them be successful adults?
Yeah. So I think, first of all, I think you really want to read Carol Dweck's work and encourage a growth mindset, right? And a growth mindset, you want to help them internalize a belief that their abilities, whether in math or in hockey, are fundamentally the output of the work they put into it, right? So nothing is more painful to me than to hear a little kid say, "I'm not good at math." It's like, come on,
Yeah.
no one is born good at math. Like you
You're not
get
good
good
yet.
at math
Yeah.
by persevering and learning and trying hard things, right? And that's what good at math means. It doesn't mean some gene that, so you're trying to encourage your children to think about the pursuit of excellence and progress as like muscles, is the way they are in sports, where the harder you work at it, the more you'll improve, as opposed to, well, I was born smart or I wasn't born smart, which is a fixed mindset. And so one of the ways that Dweck recommends encouraging that growth mindset is, don't talk so much about outcome, talk about process. Don't say, "Oh, that's a beautiful painting, Johnny." Say, "I love how you're using color," right? To get them interested in what they're doing and show an interest in what they're doing, rather than just, thumbs up, thumbs down. Like, "That's a beautiful painting. That's an ugly painting." I mean, no parent would ever say that's an ugly painting. Well, not too many parents would say that. We hope they wouldn't. But it gets the kids addicted to the praise, and you really want to not do that, because then they internalize a play not to lose mindset. The other thing is, please don't shield your kids from failure. Absolutely, you must keep them safe. If a little kid is about to run out into the street after an errant ball, you stop that. But when they want to go out for ice hockey and you don't think they're going to be good at it, that's okay. Let them give it a try. Encourage them in trying. So when my older son was between 11th and 12th grade, he took a job. He came home and announced that he had already accepted this summer job selling solar panels. And I just thought, my instant reaction was, oh my God, like sales, it's so hard, and you get so much failure, so much rejection, so many doors closed in your face. And naturally, as a loving parent, I wanted to shield him from that. But it was too late, right? He'd already said yes, and you can't renege. So I kept my mouth shut. And yes, he got lots of failures, but he also got some successes, and he felt really good about it. And he didn't, he knew Larry Wilson as well, who was a tremendous thinker, and especially around sales. And he didn't take it. He learned not to take it personally. And he felt incredibly good about the roofs that now have panels on them because of him that previously didn't have panels. So that would have been that instinct to protect him from all that rejection. And I didn't do it. And he is better off as a result.
Well, thank you for that. And it just makes me think about leadership. Obviously, parenting is leadership. And it highlights that our relationship with failure is going to be, it's just so important for us to be healthy, so that we can lead people in a healthy way, whether you're leading a team or leading yourself or leading little kids or adult kids. So Amy, it's been such a joy to read your book, and such a joy to connect with you today. Thank you for playing to win and putting this work out into the world. Last question is just where can people go to connect with you, to learn more about your work, to follow your work moving forward?
Probably the easiest thing to say is, well, there's LinkedIn, of course, Amy C. Edmondson. And I do have a website. It's not, I don't take as good care of it as I should, but you can go to Amy C. Edmondson, I think it's .com, and find out my books and articles and all the rest.
Perfect. We'll put links to that in the show notes and on YouTube. And Amy, thanks so much for your time today.
Thank you so much for having me. It was really a pleasure.
Well, hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that conversation with Dr. Edmondson. What a treat to be able to sit down with her and just pick her brain on failure, something that is part of the human condition, something that we all do, and something that certainly is part of trying to live a life to win and not just not to fail, which we talked about. I think that's a hallmark of someone trying to live an intentional life, trying to reach their God-given potential. And that's my heart here on the Intentional Leader podcast, is to try to help you gain clarity, courage, community, and consistency with each episode that we have. If you enjoyed this episode, would you mind sharing it with a friend? Help us grow our audience of leaders who are trying to reach their God-given potential. Remember that life is short. Let's go make it count.